So open your cameras during the digital photo session at the end of the session. And number 2, participants' mic will be muted all time during the sharing session because of the large number of participants. And we kindly request you to post your questions only in the Slido. The code will be shared in the next slide. So when you are going to post your questions, you can put your name as well as your country. Questions posted in Zoom chat will not be entertained because the Zoom chat we are using mainly for networking, sharing contacts and appreciating the speakers. Please use your full name as we use for the attendance and certification. Please rename yourself with your proper full name. A poll will be released in the Zoom at the beginning of the interactive session after the both speaker sharing session, which we request the participants to complete the poll within 5 minutes to show the results after the summary. So here the same QR code. People who have joined the session 1, we are using the same Slido, same QR code. We will also put the link in the chat in a short while. So let me invite the moderator for this session, Tourism and SDGs and Responsible Tourism Behavior. The moderator is Prof. Kashif Hussain, the head of the School for Mass Communication from Taylor's University, Malaysia, who has a very good experience in the academic industry, and also he has traveled a lot of places, and also he is heading a lot of research projects and so many school benchmarking projects. Without further ado, I will invite Prof. Kashif Hussain to introduce the session as well as the speakers. Prof. Kashif, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful day and a beautiful CRiT summer school. I would like to welcome all the participants to the session and also the speakers. We have today Professor Michael Hall and Professor Noel Scott with us. I will be giving the briefing about the speakers, their topics and profile in a while. First of all, you know, UN SDGs and tourism, they are one of the most important issues of discussion these days. And several universities and several institutions across the world, not just academics, also the industry, hospitality and tourism industry, and many other industries are adopting UN SDGs. So this session, CRiT Summer School, and the topics that we will be discussing today, the tourism and SDGs, responsible tourism behavior in this session are very timely. Maybe go to the next slide. I would like to introduce Professor Michael Hall. Professor Michael Hall is a very well-known personality. He's the professor of marketing in the Department of Management, Marketing and Entrepreneurship, University of Canterbury in New Zealand. I met Professor Michael in 2012, I think, in a conference at Taylor's University. And here I'm having the opportunity to meet him again face to face. And in between, I remember once we had, he was writing his book and he wanted to get some information on one of the ASEAN countries where I belong from, Pakistan. And I helped him give him a write-up on tourism statistics. It was brief, but again, always is a pleasure to welcome him to Taylor's University and our conferences as such event. Professor Michael Hall is currently, as mentioned, is a professor at the University of Canterbury, New Zealand. He is currently a docent in Geography, University of Oulu, Finland, a visiting professor in tourism program, business school, Linnaeus University, Kalmar, Sweden, guest professor in the Department of Services Management at Lund University, and a participant in the Arctic Gastronomy Project, Department of Food, Nutrition, Culinary Science, Umeå University, also in Sweden. He is also a frequent visitor to the Geography Department at Umeå University. Prior positions in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere include professor in tourism at the University of Otago, where he was also head of the department for 6 years, Professor of Tourism and Services Management at Victoria University of Wellington, visiting professor of Sheffield Hallam University in UK, Center for Tourism Studies, University of Eastern Finland, and honorary professor in the Department of Marketing, Stirling University, Scotland. His doctorate is in geography from the University of West Australia, from which he has also received an honors degree in politics. Wow, wonderful. His master's is from a faculty of environmental studies at the University of Waterloo, Canada, in geography, resource management, of course. He has honorary doctorates from universities of Omia in Sweden, Olo in Finland, Lund University in Sweden. According to the Google Scholar analysis, for the category of tourism, he is currently the most cited scholar in the subject area and is also highly cited in geography, regional development, sustainability, and global environmental change. In 2019, he was named as the Elsevier Science Direct for great thinking, arts, humanities, and social science scientist is as in the category as winner. In terms of his topic today, the SDGs have become a focal point for the relationship between tourism and sustainability. Even though the SDGs themselves pay a little attention to tourism, in fact, much of the writing on tourism and the SDGs arguably goes little beyond headline goals and discusses the shifts in sustainable development thinking that the SDGs were meant to represent from the predecessors. His presentation will aim to provide a critical overview of the SDGs and tourism contribution to them. Although they are clearly significant with respect to the post-COVID environment, the question must be asked that they are appropriate to meet not only the challenges of challenges of COVID-19, but also the climate crisis, biodiversity collapse, increased economic inequality, and increased denial and loss of human rights, in all of which tourism is deeply embedded. In response, greater consideration needs to be given on how tourism is governed and taxed, and related to this, how sustainable tourism is conceived. So I would like to invite Professor Michael Hall to begin with his session today. Welcome, Professor Michael.
Thank you very much. I was waiting to be unmuted. Some might say keeping me quiet may be a good thing. Let us see. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and for the opportunity to talk today. Slama, kia ora, welcome to what is a very, very exciting session. I think for me, it's also a sign of the times, in that normally, obviously, we could do some of this face-to-face. My second language is actually Bahasa, having done it at high school. And it grieves me at times not be able to travel and see friends. But today I want to talk about something which is an existential issue for us in tourism and in the planet. How does tourism and the SDGs come together? I think extremely importantly, how do we fit into the challenge of the Anthropocene? What is the context for the SDGs? Why are they there? And I think that's something that's important to recognize. They don't just come from nowhere. They are part of a response to a challenge that we face. And it is a challenge that is absolutely critical in terms of our future and our children's future and the future of other species on this planet. I'm sure you are familiar with the notion of the Anthropocene, this supposed change that we have in terms of the issues that we face. It's arguably part of a broader series of challenges, in that it's not just COVID-19 which is an issue, but what comes beyond. And I think that for me today, I want to think of that bigger picture in which the SDGs are embedded. Because when we consider the SDGs, this is usually all we see. I'm often not sure how many of my colleagues and my students, and I'm also at a university which is trying to meet the SDGs, how familiar we really are with the SDGs and the process by which they came into being. How different are they from what came before? Tourism, as I'm sure you recognize in terms of the SDGs, has been noted in some of them and in the documentation. But in one sense, it almost strikes me that tourism in the SDGs is almost a bit like tourism and the Brundtland Report. Remember that in the Brundtland Report, we often cite it, but tourism was hardly mentioned at all. And even in the case of the SDGs, tourism was only mentioned directly in 3 of the goals. But it is something which relates to so many of these issues. And one of the challenges that we face, I actually think, is in knowing why that was the case. What is the context for which we, as tourism researchers, academics, and tourism interested, how do we respond to this? How do we meet the big picture of what we're facing? And I guess for me, the SDGs are their focal points. They are part of a larger agenda. There's overall 169 different targets which exist as part of the 17 SDGs. The focus is meant to be on the use of natural resources and encouraging conservation, while at the same time employing people and at the same time creating opportunities for local communities, promoting local culture, and using resources sustainably. And we also see, if we look at UNWTO, it's also meant to be particularly beneficial for small undeveloping states and undeveloped countries. At one level, it sounds fantastic, but enormous concern for me, and I guess a challenge I want to lay down for all participants in the conference, is just how realistic is that? Is it possible? The SDGs are a response to a problem. Are they the appropriate response, or are they just the best that we can do given politics or the circumstances that we face? In terms of their implementation, each state party defines its own targets and timelines and implementation. Governance is therefore extremely important, but governance in terms of the context of the SDGs is in one sense very, I'll use the word loose. There's actually a weak system of institutional arrangements. The targets are there, but it's really being good members of the international community that mean that governments or business will try and reach it. How plausible is that? Are we suffering in terms of trying to do that some of the problems we face as part of the international political system? But what is interesting, if you look at the development of the SDGs from the Millennium Development Goals on what's gone before, is that what is also meant to be there is a much stronger focus on human rights, particularly on gender equality, empowerment of women, as well as also be concerned with income inequality. As I'm sure Freya will be discussing in her presentation, where is the justice and how do we respond to that justice? And it's not just economic justice, it's also social justice and environmental justice as well. And to me, that becomes a critical point in trying to think of how we can do this. Do we even have the right tools? The criticism I make, not so much of the SDGs themselves, because the goals are very laudable, but of the means by which we try and achieve them, is that focus on growth. that focus on a strong business dimension. I'm quite sure many people will disagree with me on this. I think business is part of it, but business is also part of the problem. That's how we partly got into this mess. And I don't mean all business, but some specific ones. So what should that relationship with business actually be? How does the focus on the market play its role? But most importantly, why are the SDGs, particularly in a tourism context, why do they maintain framed by a notion of growth as business as usual? And even as the UNWTO acknowledge, if tourism is not well managed, it can have a negative impact on people, the planet, prosperity, and peace. Yes, we've known that for a long time. So what does the SDGs bring to the table and to the challenge we face of growth? Because I personally think that even with COVID-19, we will probably still meet some of those targets for 2030 of international tourist arrivals. And also bear in mind that international tourism is only 14 or 15, 16% of total tourism. The rest is domestic. We know we've been at a critical juncture, and we know there's lots of discussion about transformation, but what will it actually look like in the future? Because I believe, my guess is that it'll be business as usual and it'll be back to growth. But it's the growth scenarios which have created many of the problems we are facing and trying to address with the SDGs. Think of all the various varieties of tourism, and some of you may have seen this slide in various papers I've given before or presentation. We have a whole series of attempts to try and make tourism sustainable. Since the late 60s, 1970s, this has been a focus of the UN, but at the same time, the global ecological footprint of humanity and of tourism has increased to the point it is clearly unsustainable. And that is the challenge we face in terms of tourism and the SDGs. And how do we respond to that? Especially, I think COVID-19 has made the situation worse in terms of gender rights, human rights, economic justice, social justice, and the environment. It's been an excuse in many cases for greater authoritarianism. How can we recover from this? Is it even possible? What form of sustainability do we envisage as part of the SDGs and as part of sustainable tourism? Unfortunately, I would argue that the dominant notion of sustainability is what we might describe as weak sustainability. It is a status quo, BAU, business as usual approach that tends to assume that sustainable development is possible within our existing structures. And there's a huge focus on efficiency. And if you look through the SDGs, that's also one of the underlying assumptions in what the approach will be. But is that enough? We've had that focus, as I've been suggesting, for quite a few years. We have not transformed. Emissions have got worse, biodiversity loss has got worse, and tourism's contribution to that loss and to that emissions has increased. And that, to me, is a critical problem we face. And how well do we understand the tourism system and how it fits into sustainability? Because it's a key part of the anthropogenic planet in terms of that connectivity and air networks and the contribution that is made to, I would even describe it as ecocide that we're facing. I think this is important because it affects us all. And if we, look beyond the minutiae of what we often do in tourism, this is the big picture that faces us. If we place it in the context of the Anthropocene, the notion of the Anthropocene and of environmental crisis is actually not new. In the modern context, we can go easily back to the 60s. In fact, you can argue, if you place it in the wider context of resource management, we can go back to the 19th century in terms of concerns of resources and conservation and humanity's impact. And I use that word humanity with a hint of caution, because the Anthropocene, and in fact much of the discourse on sustainable development and sustainability, almost has an assumption that it's the entirety of a single kind of human activity on a human footprint. But why? When we know there is actually an unequal distribution of impacts in terms of the Anthropocene, and we also know that there is an unequal distribution of contribution in terms of oil companies, carbon intensive companies, just to look at emissions. And we also know that they have known that they were doing this for the last 40 years. So you can't say in one sense, although all of humanity suffer, you can't say that we've all contributed equally. And you also need to recognize that we are affected differentially as well. So in one sense, we are all of this together, but we're not equally all to blame. And I think that is something which becomes critical in thinking about the SDGs. One of my biggest concerns when we think of the SDGs is not looking at them as part of a bigger picture. And a phrase I borrowed from Frankel, and I use this at the research conference on the SDGs that Regina was noting earlier, is that you have a form of analytical apartheid, and that's often in tourism and in the wider context, you have the economic context over here and you have the environmental context over here, where in fact they are deeply embedded with each other. And it also, the way we frame it as a challenge, makes assumptions, continued assumptions about economic growth, particularly within the SDGs as they are normally framed. And that is an issue. And capitalism, for want of it, is describing much of our current economic system, is the big picture. In fact, we should arguably, the phrase the Capitalocene, as ugly as it sounds, is probably much more accurate than the Anthropocene. And what we see in capitalism and in tourism is an economic system that exploits cheap nature as well as cheap labor via sustainability, sustainable tourism, and these days we talk about ecosystem services, all being commodified for the benefit of being sold. Is that the kind of nature-based tourism we want to consider? Because that's what I think is happening at the moment. Also, there are unequal impacts of the Anthropocene, depending in some countries what color you are, what gender you are, what class you are. And if you're poor, you suffer far more in terms of the distribution of environmental impact. And that's what environmental justice is concerned with. And Indigenous peoples, arguably, have been suffering this somewhat dystopian Anthropocene, to use the term, for years. They've lost their land. The lands they've had have been destroyed. And the ecological state's been grossly changed. And tourism in various ways is also often embedded within that. How therefore do we transform? How do we change? What trajectory should we have? The problem is, as I tend to see it, is that the response to many of the crises, including COVID-19, is actually more of the same. More intense resource use as the response to it. And yes, there are going to be some destinations and businesses which are trying to be more sustainable. But what happens to them within the broader picture of change? To me, there needs to be much more focus on sufficiency, not just efficiency, but sufficiency. How much do we need to lead a happy life? How far do we have to travel to be happy? And a diagram which I use to illustrate this, you can think about this issue in terms of overtourism. What is the response to overtourism? The rational response, supposedly from the WTO and others, WTTC, is we'll move them around. We'll shift them from one location to another. Well, that's fine, but how much longer can you keep doing that when you only have one planet? You cannot do it indefinitely. That kind of shifting, displacement and growth strategy cannot work in the long term. For island states and island planets like we experience, we know this. Why? Because a proportion of natural capital just becomes utilized by humans and not by others. And tourism is embedded in this. Tourism is often presented as the great savior to conservation, but the emissions of an eco-tourist to fly to a destination are the same as any other tourist. And that's one of the problems we face. How far and how fast should we travel? Because the impact of this means that natural capital is running out, or is just used by us and not used by nature. We are increasingly living on a pauperized planet. What's the policy response? The dominant policy response is utilitarian and nudge-oriented. They have their place, but what about the system? How do we change that? How do we deal with routine habit? And here, when you're dealing with issues of lock-in, you're actually dealing with issues of institutions and technology and giving people the option to do other. But how possible is that? And if I'm, wanting to consider how we do respond, then to me, right-sizing or degrowing tourism in the economy means dealing with both efficiency and sufficiency, both eco-efficiency and sustainable consumption. And this is the problem I have with just focusing on green growth. Green growth is still growth. What do you do with the savings? Because it's usually sold in terms of the adoption of efficiencies in that this will be more efficient and save you money. Okay, you save money. Where does that savings go? If it goes into more consumption, it's not solving the problem. And the problem we have is that we need to shift beyond just a narrow focus, as important as it is, on per unit or per capita or per tourist efficiency, and think of what is absolute consumption. If you only have one planet, you have to think about the absolute total of consumption, because that is the bigger tourism system. How, therefore, do we go beyond that, especially as the entire tourism system is bound by the environment? We are resource constrained because we only have one planet. And this is when you then have a problem, because if you have an area, and this is the little dot you can see, which is trying to be sustainable, you still have the rest of the system responding in other ways, which is unsustainable. You haven't solved the problem. If you have a destination or a business that's trying to be sustainable, fantastic. But if other parts of the system are not being sustainable in absolute terms, we still have a huge problem. You're not getting transition or transformation. You are actually just getting successive additions in terms of the rundown of natural capital and emissions. So how do we respond? I think most importantly, just focusing on technology and efficiency doesn't deal with the problem. And the problem is the quest for growth and how we conceive of this. We need to move beyond business as usual, or as I sometimes describe it now, Brundtland as usual. We need to move beyond that. Growth and growthism, to use that phrase, is embedded in tourism, research, publications, and in education and what we teach. To me, the most challenging entrepreneurs are those which lead, sometimes you call it a lifestyle entrepreneurship. They want to lead a good life, they want profit, but at the same time, they realize they do not want to continue to grow. They're the real champion entrepreneurs. How do we support them more? Because just focusing on app growth in absolute terms doesn't help us at all in the big picture. We also have an issue in terms of how this relates to the SDGs and how willing are we to engage in that debate? Because it's difficult to engage in this debate because we're also, as tourism academics, meant to be responsive often to industry and to destinations. But to me, it's beholden on me to make this argument because the solutions are not just market oriented. In the long term eventually becomes short term. We need to deal with issues of growth. And in tourism, I argue you can have tourism growth, but, and this is the big but, you don't want it to be traveling so far or traveling so fast. And how do we change that? Because that becomes absolutely critical. We want tourism. Tourism is wonderful, but it cannot be so far or so fast because that's where the impact is so dangerous. I've got at the bottom of this slide, how many people really care? Hopefully I'll be proved wrong over the series of the conference, but I actually don't think that most tourism academics actually really care, at least in the short term. It's the big picture. It doesn't concern now. And that's a huge problem because, as I've already said, the long term eventually becomes the short term. So how do we respond? I think the SDGs are going to fail. Why? Because they are focused on growth. Hopefully they may be part of a transition, but that's only hopeful when I'm in a good mood. Because generally, I don't think we are going to do it with the current tools we have. Brundtland, as usual, is not going to work. We are managing resources into oblivion, and tourism is a part of this. How we think about collaboration needs to go beyond private partnerships to really become community-based. The UNWTO described tourism as a sector of hope. At the moment, the way it's currently configured, I have no hope for tourism. I don't. I would love to be proven wrong, and I look forward to that. But most importantly, we need to shift our mentality to one that's just focused on growth to one that's about prospering, which is different. And there is a huge difference between sustainable development and sustainable growth. Sustainable growth, a so-called balanced approach, does not work in the long term for us. Sustainable development, which is qualitative, that is something much more positive. We want to change. How are we going to do it? And I realize that many people at this conference, I'm probably talking to those who are most aware of it. It's those who are not here at this meeting actually become much more important. How do we encourage that ethical perspective to think of more than just us, to think of the community, not just of the individual? We also need to think about resilience and recovery, but fundamentally, it's about development as something which is qualitative. And for me, this is a challenge for the tourism industry, tourism researchers, and tourism students. And these are serious questions that we need to address, I think, at all levels of the tourism system. And don't just take the SDGs for granted, but actually challenge them. By doing that, I think we'll come to a much better response, and they will serve as the transition that we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael Hall, for your session. It has a very different insight into tourism and SDGs than many usual presentations that we see and hear at different conferences and platforms. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is, I would like to welcome Professor Noel Scott, Adjunct Professor of Tourism Management, from Sustainable Research Centre, University of Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. Professor Noel Scott is Adjunct Professor of Tourism Management in the Sustainable Research Centre of University of Sunshine Coast, Queensland, Australia. His research interests include the study of tourism experiences and destination management, and marketing. He is a frequent speaker at academic and industry conferences. He has over 300 academic publications, including 17 books. He has supervised 30 over doctoral students to successful completion of their thesis. He is on the editorial board of top tier 10 journals, a member of International Association of China Tourism Scholars, and a fellow of the Council for Australian Tourism and Hospitality Education Management. He is the author of a number of publications which have been widely translated in many languages. Professor Noel Scott will be talking about responsible tourism behavior. There are a number of ways to study responsible tourism from a policy or political stance, examining either consumption or management, development of linkages between host and guests, or a trade channel certification, and society or individual analysis. His presentation will discuss the individual psychology of responsible tourism and some of the underlying psychological theories that can be used to study and encourage individual cognition and responsible behavior. It will highlight the individual cognition is often implicit, that we are fallible humans driven by the impulse, habitat, herd, easily confused and often inconsistent. So think Homer Simpson, not Spock, and don't use the theory of planned behavior. And he has much to say and share with us from his topic. Let's welcome Professor Noel Scott talking about responsible tourism behavior in his presentation. Yes, Prof, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you. Yes, please take your time. Yes, cannot.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I apologize. I left the conference, I came back, and it meant that I was unable to mute myself. So I'll share my screen. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also thank you very much to that wonderful presentation by Michael Hall. When you read out his bio, I thought I was doing okay, but when you read out Michael's, I thought, oh well, I need to lift my game a little bit. I need to do better. So let's see how I want to now share my screen. So can you see that screen okay?
We can see your screen.
Okay. Is it the right screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Responsible tourism behavior.
Oh, that's the right one. So great, thank you. So what I want to do today, and Michael, I think sort of set this up a little bit because, you know, I get a sense of frustration from Michael's presentation. You know, we sort of know the solution, but what do we do? Why aren't people dealing with these vital, important issues? And another thing he said, which is very interesting, was, well, I'm not really sure how much everyone cares about this problem, you know. And so essentially what he was doing in some ways is talking about the psychology of people in dealing with these complicated and perhaps future issues. And there's a lot of psychology about this, not so much behavior psychology, but there's a lot of useful information around if you know where to look. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about today. So, so let's start here. Here's a definition of responsible tourism. It's from Bramwell and Lane and McCabe and Mosdell and Scar, so it must be right. It's, you know, these are all the experts. So tourism-related actors can develop a sense of ethical and moral responsibility that has resonance beyond self-interest, and that there is at least a possibility that this could change behaviors and contribute to more sustainable behavior. And those actors may include all these people, right? Everyone. Now, so of course we can. Of course, tourism-related actors can change change behaviors and contribute to more sustainable tourism. And of course, they can develop a sense of ethical and moral responsibility that has resonance beyond self-interest. We all can, right? I suppose the issue is how many people do that? Is that normal behavior? Because if we want responsible tourism around the world, we have to think what other people are going to do. So we want people to develop think about things beyond self-interest. So, yeah, okay, interesting. When we look at the work that's been done on the psychology of responsible tourism, this was from 2020. Why do consumers make green purchase decisions? Very interesting, because we look at the theories and ideas that have been used. So there's the theory of environmental behavior based on theory of planned behavior. Yeah, good. Or value norms beliefs theory. This is old stuff. This is stuff from the 1970s, 1960s, 1950s. And while it may seem, then there's plenty of papers still written on this stuff, most of the ideas about a theory of planned behavior are directed at intention and don't actually translate very often into actual behavior. So maybe in this area, we're using the wrong theories to study this stuff. And then if we look at determinants of green purchase, what is it? Psychological factors, attitudes, awareness, beliefs, norms, perceptions, habits, as Michael was saying, yes, habits can be certainly important. Social demographics, well, they're correlates, but they're not perhaps explanatory. Product attributes, social factors. The issue, one of the things I'd like you to point out to you that's not here is emotion. Okay, this is basically describing a whole heap of research that's based on people are cognitive, rational people. Okay. Arguably, that's how responsible tourism is researched at the moment. We assume that people will, if given the right information or express an intention to do something, will behave in a responsible fashion. Well, I'm not sure that that's true, and I'm not sure if the psychology of would support that. And of course, yeah, yes.
Prof, no, so sorry to interrupt. Could you make your slides into full screen? We just want to see.
Okay, I'll do my best. I may have to share my screen again. Let's just see how I do that.
Okay.
Where are we?
Yeah, just full screen.
How do I do that?
Just at the bottom right.
Right.
Yes.
And then I need to share the right screen because I'm using multiple screens. Wait a minute, let me just see.
Okay.
I think I know what I'm doing now. I'll stop sharing and then I will share another screen. How about that one? Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Prof, there is a noise coming from your microphone. Distortion noise.
Can you? Is that better? No.
It gives with your voice. It gives that noise.
I don't know why. I am using a new machine, so I don't I don't know why that is.
Maybe you can unplug the mic and put it back.
Yeah.
No headset. Yeah.
We cannot hear you. Cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
good,
we can
good,
hear you very
good,
clearly.
good. Very clear.
All right.
Thank
Let's
you.
see.
Sorry, Prof, for highlighting.
No, it's my fault. I'm sorry. It all
That's
worked
okay.
when we were
It's human.
practicing, but it never worked. Never works. All right. So, so all of these ideas here that we're looking at in terms of psychology are, I think, we've been studying responsible tourism or responsible tourism behavior in a way which doesn't actually reflect how people think. And we've talked about responsible tourism. So let's think now about what is responsible tourism, and perhaps we can release the poll, please.
Sure, Prof.
Thank you. So I've got some questions in a poll that you might be able to answer. I'm going to talk about this ethical dilemma, and then we're going to I'm going to ask you to give your answer, and we'll see how you go. So this is a common problem. Sorry, not a common problem that I have regularly. A common problem used to illustrate ethical dilemmas that people may have. Okay, so here's the problem. The problem is there's a runaway trolley, a train on the tracks of a light rail, and you just happen to be there, and you can decide whether to switch the trolley from the main track. It's heading down, it's going to kill 5 people. Unfortunately, there's been some terrorist and he's tied 5 people to the track. And if you don't pull the switch, those 5 will die. There's no change. But of course, if you do pull the switch, 1 person will die. So you have to make a decision. The decision is, sorry, there's a runaway trolley, head on the tracks, 5 people, trolley heading straight towards them, standing some distance off next to a lever. If you pull the lever, the trolley will switch to a different set of tracks. Unfortunately, you notice that there is 1 person on the side of the track. You have 2 options: do nothing, and the trolley kills the 5 people; pull the lever, diverting the trolley on the side track, you will only kill 1 person. Which one are you going to do? You're going to kill the 1 man, or are you going to do nothing? So this is when you can fill out your poll.
They are already doing it, Prof.
It's great.
Yeah,
Okay.
we got around 27%. 160 people have done.
All right. So while you're filling that poll in, I'm now going to ask you a second issue. Okay. Similar thing. Slightly different. There's the same runaway trolley, but you're not next to a switch now. You're on a footbridge. And you notice that there's a very fat man in front of you. And if you realize that if you push that fat man onto the track, he will die, but his body will stop the trolley before it can reach the other 5 people. All right, so you've got 2 options: do nothing and 5 people will die, or do you push the large man off the bridge so that he dies but the other 5 are saved? What are you going to do?
Okay, Prof, we have some polls here. Let me read.
Yeah.
Around for your question number 1, for your switch, the question number 1, we have around 141, 142, 59% people says kill the man. 41 says do nothing. And then for your second question, footbridge, 55% says kill the one man and 45% says do nothing.
Okay, well, so essentially, those results are suggesting that in this experiment, there's no difference. Okay, it is interesting that kill the one man is the most popular, is the most frequently chosen thing with the switch, and that the act of pushing the person off the bridge is slightly less frequently chosen, even though it's the same outcome. Okay, so when people do this study in many times, they generally find a slightly well, yeah, it's a slightly different effect to what we found in our poll. Same direction, but much higher magnitude. So often when you do the switch thing, 90% of this must be because people are ethical here. All the ethical people are in the conference, but in the switch, 90% of people say you should kill the one to save the many. Makes perfect sense. That's very logical. But when you do the same study with similar people, you tend to get a bit of the effect that we're seeing with much higher magnitude in the poll. What you see is that most of the people say you should, only 5% of people say that you should kill the one. Okay. Why would that be? Why would there be such a difference between these two situations, although logically the consequences are the same? Well, psychologists say that it's a different situation because we think about the problem differently. When we're thinking about the switch and we're sort of removed from the situation, even in this imagined situation, we don't have to be particularly, we're sort of separate from it. We can apply heuristics, rules of thumb, okay? Whereas in the footbridge one, we tend to analyze all the consequences. And so this is about our brain has two ways to think about this problem. One is in the first switch problem, they call it a dentological response. It tends to be about, well, what should I do? Whereas in the footbridge one, you tend to think about the consequences of your actions and you make a judgment based on those conscious. It's more conscious. Whereas for a lot of the time, our brain works in a more emotional, fast and intuitive situation. Now, I'm not sure if the poll really showed that, but that's what the results say. And we see that a lot. Well, so that's probably an example of how our mental processes are not always logical. We have two situations with the same outcome, but we get different patterns of behavior. And of course, we do know that from this whole idea of the intention behavior gap. Behavioral models such as the theory of planned behavior say, well, as a result of this thing, what will you do in future? And of course, the answer is, oh, well, I'll behave really nicely. I'll save the planet. But in fact, those intentions don't translate usually into behavior. Why? Well, it's because the situation's really different. We make these judgments or statements in one context, and we may actually believe them. But then when we go home and we're in a different context and we've got lots of other problems and it's not so easy as we thought, well, we don't do what we intended to do. An example, of course, would be dieting. Typical. I have an intention to lose weight. How's the diet going? I think Michael mentioned nudges. Nudges is a new thing. It's a new word for what they call choice architecture or something. It's about changing people's behavior where people may not realize that you're actually changing their behavior. It's interesting. It tends to rely on this, make it easy for people and they'll do it. Well, that's true. There's some ethical issues about it. Is it ethical to encourage people to donate their organs, as we do in Australia, by giving people on the license, on our driver's license, the opportunity to opt out of donations, where in America and many other countries, you have the option of opting in. So what happens in America, 5% of people donate their organs if they have an accident. In Australia, 95% of people, that's a nudge. Is that a good thing? Well, is it ethical? It's certainly effective. So I think Sarah Dolnico here at University of Queensland done some work on cognitive architecture and making changes. But nudges tend to work when it's about me. If we want people to trade off individual benefit for social benefit, as Michael was talking about, they're much more reluctant. And so one way to do that might be to, and this is something that Sarah Dolnick has tried, she's tried to increase the pleasure of doing the right thing. Where essentially it's a nudge. People don't realize that you want them to eat less food or something, or clean up their plate. They do it because there's some pleasure involved. Might work in some situations. Social norms can work, but not in the way we use them now. I've often thought that one good way of getting people to stop traveling so frequently is to have a flashing sign out the front of their house to say, I have used so many global mileage points this month. At the moment, social norms, people are making social norm judgments without information about a particular person and how they're acting. It's up to the person to obey the norms, not other people to enforce the norms. Change beliefs is hard, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's one interesting thing here, because we were talking about doing good, changing things for the good. We might call that other directed behavior. And it's about trying to encourage socially aware and responsible behavior. Now, that's essentially can be seen as quite an emotional process. If you want people, if you do a good thing for another person, often you feel good yourself. That's an example of sociological reward. You might say it's a positive emotion rewarding you for doing this benevolent act. And so one of the things to think about if you want to get people to act in a other interested manner might be to try and encourage them to feel other directed emotions, such as compassion, sympathy, empathy, being happy if something happens, being delighted for if something happens. So there are other directed emotions which you may be able to encourage by structuring a situation to allow people to feel a reward for doing the right thing, not just necessarily pleasure, but other types of emotion as well. And here's another thing that Michael was talking about, because a lot of this, the issue of climate change and actions is about who's to blame, right? You know, I don't think, you know, when you ask people who's to blame for climate change or excessive consumption, as these people have done in this study, the answer is, oh, it's someone else. It's the marketing people. The marketing people are causing me to engage in high levels of consumption. So the individual blames the system, and in addition, the system or the government, the newspapers tend to blame the person. You are not engaging in green behavior. So who's responsible? Is it a system blame issue or an individual blame issue? Well, let's think about COVID. If we were in a situation like COVID and we said, this is an individual blame problem, the problem with COVID and the reason why we're not getting anywhere is because people are not doing the right thing. Well, that's the anti-vaxxers and the mask, anti-mask argument. But the bottom line is the governments are taking incredible steps, spending a lot of money on vaccines and immunization and hospitals and closing borders and doing all the things that governments can do to solve the problem. So the governments accept, I think, that COVID-19 is a system problem. We need individuals to do the right thing, but we're not going to rely on them doing the right thing. We're going to have laws and regulations and rules and lockdowns and border closures to solve this problem. So is climate change an individual blame problem or a government system problem, right? Well, I think it's a government problem. And if governments aren't doing the right thing, they bear the blame. Okay. Now, of course, it's a two-way street. I try and do the same thing myself. I've certainly traveling less over the past 18 months, but there is a psychological issue about who's to blame. And I think governments are tending to manipulate, governments and petrol companies and many other large companies are manipulating the issue to blame the person rather than to blame themselves. So if we want to research responsible behavior, we might want to ask some questions. Firstly, there's a tendency for researchers, especially doing work in things like ecotourism, helping the planet. There's a tendency for researchers to think that everyone thinks like them. And rest assured, they don't. Those people, most green people are 5% green, whereas most of the researchers, perhaps who are the original ecotourism researchers, were 95% green. You might want to, if you're looking at a particular situation to understand if responsible behavior is occurring, you might want to ask if people are even thinking about it. Are they aware of their behavior, or are they just undertaking the scripts and the habits that they would do anywhere? You might want to think, is responsible behavior in this situation rationally based or emotionally based? Do you want to change behavior or change attitude? I'm not sure. How can I encourage other directed emotions? Might be a useful question to ask if you want to think, am I using the right psychological theory? Right? Because most people are using this theory of planned behavior. It's rubbish. Oh, it's not particularly useful in some of the situations where, and you might want to ask, is this an individual or a system blame problem that I'm dealing with? So we tend to think as researchers, perhaps, that we are dealing with consumers who think like Spock. They are unemotional, they are rational, and they think through in a very intelligent and educated way the consequences of all their problems. Right? Well, unfortunately, it's more likely that we're dealing with lots of Homer Simpsons, right? People who are self-centered, who are short-term thinking and respond to social pressure and all sorts of strange arguments. So we're not rational agents maximizing self-interest, but only fallible humans driven by impulse, habits, herds, easily confused and often inconsistent. So if you want to understand people as non-rational agents, then I think that you should be thinking about people using scripts. You've got to understand perhaps more about the processes that people are using in their brains, and that is a different type of psychology to the one we're using at the moment. At the moment, people in tourism are mainly using behavioral psychology, which doesn't consider how our brain actually works. And I would encourage you, therefore, to think cognitive psychology in studying responsible behavior and live long and prosper. I don't know. I can't do that. Well, how do you do that? That's Mr. Spock. Okay, so thank you very much, Terima kasih. Hopefully that was interesting for people, and I don't. Oh, look, my poll's gone back the other way. So we're starting to move in the right direction. We'll see. Over back to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Professor Noel Scott. You know, there has been a great learning from your presentation as well. I would say, you know, hearing about anthropocene and eco-centric approaches towards tourism SDGs has been very interesting. And also tourism industry has a greater responsibility over tourism SDGs. We all can understand, and we all are very aware. And looking at you know, a balanced approach between what is weak and what is strong, you know, these points, tourism, capitalism, growth, unequal impacts, the impact contributions, unequal contributions, sufficiency for happy life, you know, these are important points of Prof. Michael's presentation. Again, to look at policy and approaches and different perspectives. From Professor Noel Scott's presentation, it is very important, interesting to look at ethical perspective and moral responsibility. You know, psychology of responsible tourism behavior, looking at emotional thinking and rational thinking has been an interesting piece. Looking at either to blame an individual or either to blame the whole system, or should it be a collective responsibility, are very important points being discussed during this presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Michael and Prof. Scott. I shall look at different questions. There has been a number of questions being posted by individuals, and I would say for Prof. Michael, there are around 12 questions so far I have received, and 3 questions for Prof. Noel Scott. Let me just pick 3 questions for Prof. Michael first, right?
There's another 3 questions just came in for Prof. Noel.
Yeah, I will capture that. But let us just go through with Prof. Michael some questions.
Sorry, Dr. Kashif, Prof.
Yes.
Kashif. Just like to inform that the pool of Prof. Michael will be launched now. So try to complete in 5 minutes so that the result will be shared after the summary by Prof. Kashif. Thank you.
Yeah, there will be 3 questions for Prof. Michael as well, for all of you to give polls, you know, while we are discussing. And these questions are, SDGs are more of an economic concern rather than industry concern. The green growth rather than degrowth, will it be the way for tourism to contribute best? And another question. So while you are doing that, let me go back to the Q&A session. Prof. Michael, I was with you. There's a question from one of the participants. Do we need to redefine or re-clarify the idea of development? Should the development be associated so strong with growth? Is there an alternative approach, maybe with more focus on quality rather than quantity of life? If yes, who decides the focus or this balance?
I think the short answer is yes. I completely agree with the statement. That notion of sustainable development about being focused on well-being is actually very widespread. The problem, I think, and this is just my personal take, is that the notion of it being tied in with growth, I'd almost use the word hijacked, has become hijacked by certain economic and political interests. And I think that's the big issue. But the underlying notion of human well-being has always been a part of sustainability. And if anything, I think it goes back to the way in which things like the SDGs are actually formulated, in that rather than being community-based and people-based, they are sectoral interest-based. And I think that is the kind of shift that needs to occur. And what I'm suggesting ties in very, very much with what Noel's saying, because from a social marketing perspective, the most effective change comes from involving the community as part of the decision-making. What is it that they want to change? What are their community and social norms? And I think it's that starting point. But to do that means people like us advocating it as part of policy process.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. Another question, could substituting quality, which is almost similar, close to the first question as well, could substituting, the question is from Italy, one of the participants joining us, could substituting quality for quantity be an effective strategy for tourism degrowth? Now, we were talking about mass tourism, and now we're talking about sustainability. It's an interesting question.
I think the thing is, it's that point I was trying to make. Degrowth doesn't necessarily mean less trips. I can envisage a scenario, this is what I often advocate. I can actually advocate for more trips, but if they're not so far, and if they're made by more sustainable means of transport, it's absolutely fine. And I'll be quite honest, the biggest challenge in terms of sustainable tourism is the aviation sector, because they're the ones who are most affected by that type of shift. The accommodation sector, the attraction sector can still do very, very well. The biggest problem is aviation. And I'm not saying aviation will disappear, because I don't think it will. But if you're looking at sustainability, that is the big challenge in terms of how far we travel and the mode that we use. And that's what needs to be addressed. And clearly, when you're advocating change, there are some economic interests affected. And the aviation sector is the one which is most substantially affected by that kind of degrowth scenario.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Michael. I would read up a question for Professor Scott. Another question from Italy. How to turn tourism into an economic sector that is not based on individual, thus selfish desires and needs? Is this kind of embedded in tourism definition?
So that was my question?
Yes, sir.
Oh, look, I think Michael should have some more questions. So I don't, he had 12 questions and I've only got 3. So I think it's his turn to take another question. All right, well, if I can answer it. I think that the question that was asked is a sort of a global question, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of like saying, what do we do to change the world? And I'm quite reluctant these days to give an answer because the situations are so complicated. I don't. Ask me the question again, and I'll see what I can say. What was the question again?
Okay, let me repeat. How to turn tourism into an economic sector that is not based on individual desires or needs?
Well, well, from a psychological perspective, you can't, because everything is based on individual desires and needs. That idea that a person is going to behave as a human being without desires and needs is incorrect. That's like thinking we're all rational people. So the outcome of my talk would be to say you can't. You can encourage things, that's what nudges are, but my feeling, and I think I support Michael in this way, is that I'm a little bit cynical about the initiatives that have are proposed, and there's a need for stronger action at a political level rather than changing individuals' behaviors and desires. And I mean, you know, if you can get a groundswell of opinion which will lead to changes in laws, well, that's good, but that's not the way they worked with COVID, right? With COVID, they said, you don't know what's coming, guys. You don't know how bad this is going to be. We are going to have a lockdown of the borders. And everyone said, what? What? Why are you doing that? The problem was it was an easier sell because it was an immediate problem. It was something that was going to happen in the next 3 months. The big problem about climate change is that it's an incremental, slow burn problem that's getting worse and worse over time. And it's harder for governments to get acceptance. But at the end of the day, I think that's what's going to make the difference. I don't think it's going to be an individual desires and motivations issue. Sorry, thank you. Oh.
Thank you, Michael, for the, thank you, Scott, for the answer. I would take another question for you, Scott. Do you then think that the same level of global intensity that we put on finding the cure for COVID-19 should be adopted for solving climate change issues? It's from Bahamas. The question from Bahamas.
Well, I think it's pretty important for the Bahamas to get some urgent stuff because I mean, how far are the Bahamas above water, above average sea level? Probably less than New Zealand. So it's going to be Bahamas, then Michael, and then Australia. So it's less urgent for me. I think that that would seem like a very logical solution, right? But it's not. My point is, people aren't logical, right? They tend to devalue long-term issues, long-term problems, and focus on short-term problems, which is why COVID is getting much more attention than climate change.
Thank you, Prof. Let me go for another question now for Prof. Michael. Again, question from Bahamas. Should we be aiming at development that combines economic, social, and environmental aims, and not at development that compromises between them? Are the three pillars of sustainability still be valid in their current form post-COVID situation?
This is one I always feel guilty about, because as someone who was writing on sustainable tourism early in the career, I was also one of the people who did a three pillars type model, the intersection between social and economic and environmental. And I was wrong. I was wrong. And I feel terribly guilty about this. I tell my students, never believe what you read in print, because ultimately the social economic dimension is constrained by the environment. And I think that's where I have a real problem with the three pillars model as it's normally conceived, because it suggests you can trade off the environment for some of those other things. And ultimately, I don't think you can. I don't think you can. So I think that three pillars model, which continues to get articulated by the UNWTO, even though it's dreadfully, dreadfully wrong from a global perspective, is part of the problem that we face. And I have said that when I've had the opportunity at UNWTO conferences or at EU conferences. But again, you're dealing with people who don't want to hear that, because there are many people who don't want to hear that there are constraints. And this is not a new debate. It's been around for a very, very long time. And it's a really, really tough one to be able to manage. But the three pillars model doesn't work. We shouldn't be teaching it. It's ancient history, and it was wrong. And I was wrong when I was talking about it.
Thank you, Prof. Michael. Maybe I would like to wrap up the session with one or two small points. Maybe one question from me. We have recently noticed the space tourism from Virgin Galactic, and also the New Shepard's spacecraft from Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos of Blue Origin. What do you think? How sustainable it would be when the future comes, and how compliance is this practice of space tourism would be with the UN SDGs?
If Noel doesn't mind, I'd love to start off on this one. I was actually going to include space tourism in my presentation. I'm a space nut, and if it wasn't for other things, I'd be doing cosmology and physics. That's what one of the things I love, but there's not much of a career in that. Space tourism at one level seems wonderful, but it's not very, very environmentally friendly at all. I remember doing some work on this about 5-6 years ago, and I'm coming back to it. It's not very friendly. There's all sorts of high emissions high up in the atmosphere, which are not good. I absolutely genuinely fear for the impact of private corporations, let alone some governments, going onto the moon or other planets, and the damaged environmental damage that they can cause there, because that is also part of the long-term plan for space tourism. It's one of those things that at first glance looks really sexy, but it has all kinds of really significant implications in space and on Earth. I mean, I actually do advocate for space travel and space science. I really do. But the reality is, I think it's terribly unsustainable form of tourism. And as for the stuff that's been said by, the billionaire advocates of space tourism, they would be much better off offering better conditions for their employees here on Earth and ensuring that their business interests have less environmental impact than telling us they go up in space and it gives them a new conception of what the planet's like. Because we knew damn well what the planet was like before they got there, and we knew what a hell of a mess that people like them have got us into. Sorry, that's be my response. Sorry, Noel, over to you.
Oh, no, that's great. Here's the scheme. So I'm a marketing person, and I want you to go on a space trip. So at the moment, they don't go into space. They go, well, they go to the edge of space, right? 100 kilometers is supposed to be, up is supposed to be the edge of space. And I don't know how long the trip takes. Maybe it's, what is it, 20 minutes at the top? And you go through some period, you know, you go through quite a lot of training and stuff in order to have 10 minutes or 20 minutes of, I think they actually get 5 minutes or something of 0G, and they can look out the window, and then they lie back down again and they come back down, and they've got a, what, 10% chance of dying on the way. So now I think you could do that on the basis of status. Okay. Here's the next one. You can go into space, and you can spend you have a tour package on a spaceship on the International Space Station, where you do get irradiated, and you come back sunburned because of the high energy radiation that you've been receiving, and so don't have any babies in future. You get a chance to look out the window. There's one toilet that you can probably use, and you do get a chance to look out the window, right, and do some upside down gymnastics in free fall. And
a few seconds, huh?
so is that a good thing, a rational thing that you would want to do? I wouldn't. I mean, I when I was younger, I thought, yeah, well, this would be a great experience. But then when you start looking at the actual things that you're going to do, I can't imagine it. It's essentially it's a status symbol. It's saying, I've done something that no one else has done. And if you want a status symbol, you can do it. But I tell you, I think myself that the status of it will wear out fairly quickly. Right?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Prof. Noel, for your opinion on this question. It was a very interesting question I wanted to bring up to the session. There are many beautiful questions, a number of questions for both Prof. Michael and Prof. Noel Scott. Both of you have a number of questions, but we are running short of time. However, just to close, I would like to say, attitudes of the people. It is easy to change the attitude of the people, but it is difficult to change the behavior of the people. To change attitudes, it takes a short-term effort, but changing behavior is a long-term process. You need to invest and devise a lot of strategies to change the behavior of the people.
Oh, just one thing. No, that's not quite true. It's easy to change the attitudes of a person in terms of what they say. It's quite hard to change a person's attitude, right?
Really?
So people will say, "Oh, yeah, I agree," or something, but it depends on how important the attitude is to them, right? And anyway, sorry.
Well, when they start realizing the value behind, the rational thinking behind, probably there's a chance for them to change, right?
There's always a chance for people to change. Yeah.
In your opinion, okay, would you blame individual or the system?
Well, let me ask you a slightly different way. If I was autistic or reduced in capability in some way, should I be blamed? Probably not. It's out of my control. So if I'm a normal person, should I be blamed? Well, I should be blamed to the extent that I have some control over the situation. And fortunately or unfortunately, the people who have control over much more of this situation than I do are in government, positions of power, large companies, and so on. So in terms of capability to make a change, I don't think you can blame the person so much as the larger companies.
Yes, it is. I think it's a collective approach, and we need systems thinking to bring a change, to manage this tourism, SDGs, and also, the behavior itself. With this, thank you so much. I would like to call Mr. Kandapan to show the poll results. And also, he would like to do something with the word cloud.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Kashif. So I just put the outcome of both professors' pool results. This is Prof. Michael's. So we got almost 361 participants who have filled the pool. So this is the result of the pool. The 3 questions, Prof. Michael, for your reference.
So it is 36% people agree to the question number 1. And 47% agree to the question number 2. And 56% agree to the question number 3.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yes, this is the poll results for Scott. The other way around, 60% would want to kill. Again, 53% would want to kill the person. And 41% will have emotional, and 59% will have more rational thinking approach.
Just on that emotional rational thing, that's what I would call folk psychology. It's how people would normally think that their brain works because that's what they've been told, but in fact it's wrong.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for giving the questions for the poll, both of you. We request the participants to give the feedback in one word so that we will create the word cloud, and the word cloud will be shared after the digital photograph. Okay, the same Slido will be using. So now the word cloud is on.
Let's do the word cloud. Give one word to Prof. Michael and Prof. Scott's presentation.
Just let me reset. Okay, meanwhile, when the people are doing the polling, we will go to the next one. I will call our PhD student Shelley to go ahead with the digital photo session. So I think we have almost 543 live participants. Probably it will go 10 to 11 shots of digital photos. Shelley, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, you can say 1, 2, 3, sustainable smile, then you can go ahead.
Okay, so it's the first one. Then keep smiling, the next one. Okay, thank you very much. Still got okay, keep smiling.
So many photos.
It's like maybe 6 to 7 with the camp. I'm still taking, I'm too slow, sorry, I want. Okay, done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shelley, for acknowledging the participants with the photograph. Let's see the word cloud. I'm sure everyone can see the word cloud now. Okay, people who have missed to scan the QR, you can still do the QR on the left. It is just one word. I can see the bigger bubbles coming, very positive. Probably, I don't know, it's a psychological positive or anything. Probably Dr.
Mind
Noel,
blowing.
Noel will,
So emotional.
yeah, emotional or probably it is psychological insights, interesting, amazing. And we can also see the sustainability side, responsible
Yeah.
behavior.
Thought-provoking.
Yeah, I think 150 people have done. Maybe we will give another 10 seconds. You can still continue posting. Okay, it's getting mind blowing. I think still
That's an
there.
interesting comment.
Yes, especially the emotion is always there.
Yeah, indeed, the session was also thought-provoking.
Yeah,
You always look at, different emotional ways and rational ways.
yeah.
It was again a food for thought to rethink.
Okay, probably I think we have reached almost 180. I think it's a good response rate according to the numbers. Okay, thank you.
With this, from my side, I would say thank you so much to the chief organizer, Professor Mustafa, and executive dean, Prof. Nitya. Again, Kandapan, Joanne, and Dr. Shantani, thank you so much for your support. Great to get to know you guys more, Prof. Michael and Prof. Noel Scott. Thank you so much. With this, I will stop, and I think I will leave Kandapan to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you so much. So, on behalf of CRiT, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our speaker for today, Prof. Michael Hall and Prof. Noel Scott. Big round of applause to them, participants. And the next round of applause to Prof. Kashif Hussain and Ms. Jogan for managing the entire floor and being moderating, and Ms. Jogan was very well filtering the question and passing to Prof. Kashif. Thank you so much to both of you. And also I would like to thank my students who have been supporting us, and of course a big thanks to the people, like 500 over people have lively presented, which shows the success of the day one. And I think we look forward the same support and your virtual presence in the tomorrow session, which is corporate social responsibility, CSR, and sustainability in hospitality. The speakers are Dr. Joyce and Dr. Patricia, and the moderator will be Dr. Rupam Kono and Ms. Chan Eileen from Taylor's University, Malaysia. So stay tuned. Maybe if you want to watch back all the sharing done the entire day, go back to our YouTube channel and watch again, and probably you will get a lot of research problems, probably new topics, and probably you can start reading the articles which was published by all our speakers of today's session. Once again, thank you everyone. Stay safe today so that you can join us tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Noel
Thank you,
and Prof. Michael.
Thanks
you.
to our
Yes,
organizing
thank
team.
you. Thank you all participants.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. It went very well. I thought it was well organized.
Thank you. Thank you for your.
Thanks for your compliments, Prof.
Thank you,
See you,
Professors
Michael. See you,
and
everyone.
Prof. Noel.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Yeah, have a good
Thank you.
night.
Thank you.
See you all tomorrow.
So we will stop live streaming now.